You're listening to Freight Famous, presented by Rose Rocket, bringing you the people that make trucking move. From behind the scenes into the limelight. Here's your host, Justin Bailie.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Freight Famous. This is a podcast produced by Rose Rocket at the Rose Rocket Studios. I'm your host, Justin Bailie. This is our very first episode of Freight Famous. We will be releasing these podcasts once a month. Thank you, Ed, for the applause. On this podcast, we are going to talk about guests about how they build, scale, and automate their transportation businesses. But I do anticipate we're going to go into wide-ranging topics that go everywhere into maybe, who knows, family, mental health, weather, anything you may want to that may be interesting. The idea is to keep this somewhat informal, but bring you valuable content, all the same. So today with me is Ed Stockman. He is the CEO, founder, and friend of mine from Neutral. Ed is a dynamic leader who has helped create revenue models, scale businesses, and close enterprise accounts in the transportation space. He founded Neutral in 2018. We're so happy to have you on the show, Ed. Thanks for being here, my friend.
Good to be here, man. Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it. And that studio looks amazing.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Just
congrats on the continued success as well. You guys are crushing it. Love what you guys are doing. And we talk to a lot of different TMS providers and just being in the nature of the business and in the industry. And you guys are doing something pretty unique. So much respect.
Well, I really appreciate that. It's a lot of work. We're really proud of what we're doing, and it always feels like you have so much to do still. Even as much as we're I think having really good success and starting to see momentum and the right metrics are starting to show up. It's an incredible amount of work, isn't it? I mean, I think you can speak to that. I do want to talk about Neutral. I think we go through some of the same things, but it's certainly it's really rewarding, but really friggin' hard, right? So I think, but thanks for that. And about Neutral, I'd love if you could help those listening understand a little bit about what Neutral is and how it came to be.
So I've been in the industry for about 13 years and mainly on the brokerage side. So have led sales efforts at Redwood and Transfix and was an individual contributor at Echo where I first started. And where I believe everything is going these days is automation and digital bookings, but we notice so many people having a difficult time connecting to carriers and finding the capacity, and especially in this pandemic-driven supply chain crunch, we have a lot of issues with just purely connecting different parties in the space. So rather than try to be another broker, we really started looking at the needs for the brokers, and one of the major problems that we solved in the connectivity world was integrations, and a lot of brokerages invest in humans to connect today, and that happens through a lot of phone calls. We all know how difficult it is just to find a truck. For those that know the unit of economics within a brokerage, your margins are let's just call it around $200 per load, and typically about half of that goes to sourcing a truck. So we see a huge opportunity to be able to save the brokers money, and that happens in the form of connectivity. But in 2022, we think the solution is integration. So in short, we're really the connectivity layer that exists between carriers and brokers, and we view ourselves as in the travel analogy, global distribution systems for truck brokerage.
Got it. So if you're a broker and you're using an existing TMS, kind of maybe just granularly and really talk to me like a 6-year-old, what is it that Neutral's doing practically to help surface loads maybe easier, faster, and more scalably?
Yeah, so you're a broker, you use a TMS. You probably use one, maybe two other solutions outside of your TMS that the operator is in every single day, but for the most part, you want to live out of your TMS. That's the major piece of software that you've invested in. It probably runs the majority of your business, and We handle integrations with a lot of the new tech-enabled carriers, with the legacy carriers, the enterprise carriers. We also have a user interface where carriers go in and search, find, and book shipments. So, for the broker, there's really no behavioral changes. There's no operational changes whatsoever. We do a simple integration with Rose Rocket, which we already have up and running, and a broker, one of your clients, turns on Neutral, and we charge a flat dollar amount for every carrier we bring in who winds up booking a load. So really there's no lift, there's no integration work, there's no sourcing. It's just purely a pay-to-play model on our side where if we find you capacity for a particular load, we'll lower your cost to serve in a transactional model.
Yeah, it's a super interesting, I think, I've been talking to Ed for, I think when we first started talking with Neutral was really just a concept even. And, Rose Rocket was, even much earlier at that time. And it's been really impressive, I think, watching you grow the business, and, in those early days, and I think we can both speak to this from, being sort of startup founders, is those initial sort of 0 to 1 days when there's, lots of maybe interest, but the product is small, if not completely non-existent. Money is super tight, hard to come by. You got to get to that place where you're in that circle of investors want to see some traction, but you need some money in order to help build a product that will allow you to get to some traction. And so, kind of just hustling and navigating your way through that is I often do think of it as very much a sales effort, really. And so I think for, both you and I coming from pretty vast sales backgrounds, I think that certainly helps in those early days, because that industriousness is just so critical. And I think for, those listening who are thinking from a, maybe you have a startup or you have a business idea, I would say that initial, I want to say 6 months, but it's probably 1.5 years, is really about willing your way through it. It just feels so, looking back at that, it's in one way I would never want to do it again, but at the same time, I don't know what else I would ever want to do,
Yeah, and you touched on it in your opening remarks, but there's most definitely a mental health element there. I didn't think we'd get into that quite this early in the conversation, but I think for me that's probably it's probably one of the most challenging parts of this journey and getting from 0 to 1 is balance. And industrious, I feel like most founders, that's almost inherent. That's almost a given. I think probably with the vast majority, but the ability to properly balance, take a step, zoom out, understanding what your true priorities are in life. And for me, I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I'm married, and dealing with that and having to balance family and work and the livelihood of our employees, and that's a lot to manage. So I think out of everything that you've just said, that balance has probably been the biggest hardship for me personally. But like most other entrepreneurs, you have to remain incredibly enthusiastic and about what you're doing, and I think that naturally rubs off on your friends, your family, your kids, your employees, and so on and so forth. But certainly a challenge.
Yeah, I remember early days. We went to Y Combinator in 2016, which meant we had to move from Toronto to Silicon Valley for the better part of 6 months. And at that point, I had 3 young kids then, and I had to leave them. I was divorced, so it was challenging in terms of I couldn't bring them with me. That wasn't going to work, and so. I basically went the better part of 6 months without seeing my kids outside of on Zoom, and I think that I've had people even mention to me in the time that you chose your business sort of over your family, and that's a comment that cuts pretty deep for me, and I think that what I was doing is I was actually choosing my family in that I was making the investment then because I had pure faith and pure belief that I would be able to, co-create something like this, which would then afford us the opportunity to have more flexibility where I could be home more often for later on in life. So, you could argue that I sold out those early days for a future that was by no means guaranteed. And that was probably the risk. And that was what I think a lot of people around me at that time were saying, is that, there's no guarantee that this works out and you could just end up selling out that time. Thankfully, it is appearing to be starting to manifest and work out. But man, like that was a thing. But I think, going back to what you said, trying to find that balance, there is a time where it's super competitive out there, and you've really got to want it, And I think it's a good moment as you're kind of going down the journey to say, is this something I want to do? Do I want to venture out and start my own business? Do I want to, get involved in a startup at super early days? Like, you better really want it in a visceral way, because it will be a wasted effort. I would have to think that if you're half in, you're going to burn that time anyway, but you're not fully committed. It's probably not going to work. I mean, you got to last, right? And you got to really, really want it. So to that point, I feel really also, grateful again for coming through, but finding that balance it's a bit of an illusion. I don't know that balance is actually even actually achievable. And I guess I would fire that back to say, do you have balance?
Yeah, I think even it's waves. It comes and goes, and that's a feeling, and it could be the reality of the balance, and it could be just my complete imagination of my definition of balance at that 5 minutes of time. But I think the piece that you just touched on it's funny timing. I just had a conversation with one of my founders around core values, and one of the things I believe most entrepreneurs probably have, most founders probably have, but maybe the most crucial value is that competitive spirit. And you have to want it. You have to almost be willing to do anything in order to win. And to that regard, I always feel like I'm failing somebody. So to answer your question, I probably don't have balance. I'm as close as I think I can get to it, but I struggle with the feeling that I'm always failing somebody. It's either my wife, it's either my kids, it's either the business as a whole, or a certain employee, or a group of employees. But it's very, very difficult to be well-rounded and have that balance. And even when I'm at my best and I feel great physically, mentally, when I'm doing all of the right things, there's still something in here that's still sitting there saying you can be doing this better, and that's maybe a necessary evil in what we do, but it's one of those things that I need to cope with. I need to just admit that that's never going away, and it's part of what sparks that competitive spirit and that competitive drive to keep going. But it's certainly something that I personally struggle with from time to time.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think you're alone on that, and good on you to, I think, speaking of it, this openly to an audience of 10 or 10,000. I think that's it's brave, man, and I think by even us having this conversation, I hope this does at least inspire somebody to know that it's okay to struggle, and it's actually what everybody else is going through, and to say that you're not alone is actually an understatement. If you weren't struggling, you are alone, because I think we all have it, and again in this camp, in this group, in that which we're in, and I think of it as sort of as a brother and a sisterhood of entrepreneur. We there's certainly almost, it seems to me, a mental health affliction that almost goes like, it's almost like part of the deal. Like, it's like, if you're sort of vetting a founder to say, like, are they going to make a good founder? Do they seem to have some sort of mental health issue? They'll probably be an okay founder. It's almost like a prerequisite for the role. So I want everyone out there to know that we're all going through it, and therapy is good, and we need to speak loud and proud about this, because it's not going to get better if it's silent. So I guess pivoting off of that a little bit and going back to kind of what brought you here. We've been talking a lot around here lately with different organizations and even ourselves internally about sales motions, specifically at brokerages, and how they're thinking about scaling sales or hiring sales, but just all the things, because I think there's been such a shift from pre-pandemic, sort of hat in hand sales, and it was kind of the the way it's been done for a really long time. They're kind of optimizing things, but at the end of the day, it was make a bunch of calls, go outside, see people, take them out for dinner, do the thing, get the deal, right? That was sort of the way that things have been since I've been in it, and much before that, probably. I think there's been a big shift and some things have changed. I think we've been now reassessing what it means to sell and to be in sales and how to do it well and what tools now are available with things going virtual and what have you. So I'd be really curious to get your feedback on, looking back at, what are some of the things that you did to have success, maybe as a salesperson individually. And we'll break this. This will be a longer question. So sort of, individually, what made you successful as a salesperson? What made you successful from a leadership perspective in identifying sales talents and bringing them along? And then I think, sort of the third part to that question is looking at it today, maybe what would you do or how do you think of things differently if you do it all?
Yeah, so definitely a lot there, and a lot of learnings and evolution throughout my career that's feeding into this opinion and answer. But I think one of the things very early on in my career, I had actually a sports coach that just reinforced this time and time again was understand your habits, understand and define the habits that you will require to eventually win. And I kind of took that same mantra and applied it to me as an individual contributor and sat there and said, what do I have to do? What are other people doing? Let's just go into the brokerage floor and look at the leaderboard of the top 5 individuals that are just crushing it, making a ton of money every single year and landing new deals and expanding with their customer base, and really started just evaluating and just being a sponge and absorbing those habits that they were doing, and try to piecemeal that together and put together my own version of all of these different great qualities and characteristics that I saw amongst the folks on this leaderboard. And the easiest one is well, so first off, I think being self-aware and defining your habits is probably the first element to being a successful individual contributor, or at least in my eyes. Just know what you're doing, know what you're going to do every single day, have a plan. But the easy ones are time commitments. Come in early, stay late, have good work ethic and discipline. But have a plan of attack, and that could, when I'm talking about a plan of attack, I'm talking about lead generation. Talking about outreach, time zones. Are you calling people at the right time? Who are you calling? When and why? Know your value prop. Don't be another broker who's calling and pitching, single point of contact. You're my livelihood. How many times do shippers hear those same words out of every single freight broker that calls them? Have a real value prop. And in today's world, my opinion, one of the things or elements that I think contributed to my success as an individual contributor was I didn't want to sell me necessarily. I wanted to sell capacity, because that's what people want to buy. It's tangible. It's real. It's a product. And I don't believe when there's tens of thousands of freight brokers out there calling these shippers that you're a real product. You're commoditized at that point. And how do you get away from that a little bit? And how do you have a little bit more of an analytical approach and give the shipper something that they're truly going to need? That's capacity. They don't need Ed. They don't need Justin. They don't need anyone in particular who's going to work really hard because their commission check is going to put food on their table and be able to support their family. They just need a truck. So let's go through the hard work. Let's understand their network. And let's compare that to our network and do a little bit of behind the scenes analytic work to understand how do we provide capacity to this particular shipper. And let's go in there and sell something real to them. So I think that was the foundation of my kind of value proposition, my self-value proposition. And then from there, it was really defining the leads, the personas, who I'm calling, when am I calling them, and just be incredibly disciplined with that. So that was I think, early stages in my career, and that's having a sports background and just being able to apply some of those same fundamentals. But
Do you mind if I
naturally,
click on? Mind if I just interrupt to click on a couple things you said in there? I think we were recording and doing some content yesterday around that, and really similar thoughts from our side around have something to say. Have something that's valuable that starts with the customer, that really says, like, this is what we do that's unique to you, and this is why it's valuable. Because trying to make yourself heard, like you said, amongst you would know best, how many brokers are in the United States? 15, 16,000, probably something to that, registered
20,
maybe. Yeah. And so, how do you stand out from there? And it's not going to be, we do everything for everyone. I think that is, we see that's too often of this, what you see is sort of selling service, which, you and I both know is a promise that you deliver to keep the account, not to acquire it. So I think that there is certainly a movement is, sort of good to hear you, I think, validate that it's really about finding the particular value for the customer. And I think that a lot of that comes from saying no as well. And so recognizing, where can you deliver extraordinary value and where can't you? And having the discipline to say no to certain opportunities, because those, they're just sucking your time away from the ones where you can do good work. So I think, I would certainly second that. I want to talk a little bit about when you said looking at the leaderboard of the top 5 people. Do you mean that in a sense of, having a mentor? And maybe, on that note, like, how did you do that? Did you shadow certain people? Did you learn from people? And were you deliberate about building those relationships? And if so, maybe how did you go about doing that? I think people could be, especially if you're new to sales, you could be sort of intimidated to go up to somebody who's having success and you feel like you're wasting their time. And so maybe, talk to me like I'm a new salesperson looking to build a mentor or mentee relationship. How would you go about that?
I think one of the greatest attributes of Echo Global Logistics, where I started, was their training program. And that really allowed me to go in. It's mandatory. So shadowing is mandatory. You just have to do it. And a lot of the people on that leaderboard has to shadow. And have people shadow them. They have to welcome them. They have to give them a headset, plug into the phone, and sit next to me for X amount of hours a day. And it's a requirement. So I think just having the ability to see what they're doing every single day, and then having the comfort to go back and ask questions and follow up was just really, really eye-opening and interesting. And everybody's going to have a slightly different experience. Everybody's going to be dealing with different fires that inevitably will pop up. But I think it's less about looking for a mentor. I know this has happened to me in the past where I've kind of thought I needed a mentor, but without any specific agenda. And if you don't necessarily have that agenda, it's very difficult to maintain that relationship and get anything out of it, because you're searching and then the other person doesn't know how to help, and it winds up typically being a waste of time unless you have an objective. And I think I would switch that maybe to a protege rather than a mentor, and just somebody that you're trying to emulate rather than somebody I'm going to seek advice from, because you don't necessarily need to trust this individual like you would a mentor. You don't necessarily need to inherit some of these qualities, but where, like anything else in life, your decisions are based on an aggregated calculation of a lot of different experiences. And I think those decisions that you make going into sales, especially if you've shadowed somebody or hopefully many people, is just seeing and hearing a lot of different things and trying to compile the best characteristics out of each one of those. So a little bit less about a mentor, I'd say, and more just about a protege that you're trying to emulate.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting call, and I think that's a nice differentiator between the two. And it feels like even just that language almost sort of deflates the pressure a little bit, I think, because that does feel a little less committed and largely less committed, I think, and less sort of emotionally committed almost. So that's a nice heuristic. Okay, so let's do this. I am a small brokerage starting to get some traction. I've maybe hired a salesperson or two, but I'm really looking to start scaling it, and I want to make an investment. Processes probably aren't still fully worked out. I'm not totally sure how things are happening, but they kind of are. I think you understand the business I'm talking about. And I think a lot of our listeners can relate to this, or in fact are in that business. Maybe some just sort of tips and tricks on how to build out that next level. How do I take this from 2 to 6 salespeople? And what are things that maybe at that point I need to start looking at in terms of how I'm gonna scale, and maybe what I need to watch out for, and again, tips and tricks that are kind of digestible and little kernels I can take away.
Define what's working. Write down what's working, and that's another good point. Document everything, whether it's just a never-ending Word document or whatever you need to do. Document every single journal almost, and whether you're an individual contributor or you're a sales leader, all of that information. If you're building and if you're scaling, all of those thoughts, all of those experiences, all of those wins, all of those losses will be incredibly important in 3, 6, 9 months. Whenever you go from 1 to 6, 6 to 12, 12 to 120 and 10x that. But I think one of the things that I'm really big into is developing the playbook and having some sort of repeatable process, and the more you document really helps drive that playbook. But some of the fundamentals, I think, are talking to the clients, understanding the personas, the different demographic of clients, and what's working for them. Why do they use you? Why do they like you? Why haven't they gone to somebody else yet? Define your value prop. It's one of the things I think most smaller companies struggle with, and we touched on this a little while ago. Is it capacity? Is it you as a salesperson? Is it a brand? A lot of folks try to sell a brand name. I work for top 5 XYZ brokerage, and you should deal with me because we're the biggest and we have access to more capacity. And it's like, great. Well, how does that help me? Give me capacity, and then we'll talk. But I think the value prop is super important for anybody coming into brokerage sales. Define if you're looking for somebody new or with industry experience. I've always had tremendous amount of success hiring service people, waiters, waitresses, door-to-door sales, car sale, anybody that's gotten crushed, that has had to deal with other people, that's just had life thrown in their face nonstop. Like those are people you use the term industrious a couple of times today, and I think that there are specific qualities and characteristics of who you're going to hire, but you have to process that. You have to think about what is the right candidate. Am I willing to pay more money for somebody that has industry experience? And industry experience is not to be confused with a Rolodex. I think that's a very common mistake in this industry, is they've been in sales for 5 years or they've been in sales for 7 years. They have a Rolodex of people. If you're selling a Rolodex and we're in an interview's done. Like, I've been around long enough where people are not just bringing their shippers from place to place and job hopping, and that's not how transportation or freight brokerage works. So I think that's probably one of the more common mistakes I see. But make sure you have a process for hiring. Make sure you understand the type of candidate that you believe will set you up for success. Document everything. Have your revenue model down. Focus on what has worked for your clients, and then I would say that those are the core principles. And then as you start hiring a couple of these folks, really start, I would say, setting up for scale. So one of the things we talk about at Neutral is growth versus scale. Growth is going up and to the right. Scale is figuring out the processes and the automation, how to do more with the same or more with less. And as you start hiring 1, 2, 3 reps, you start to get a pretty good understanding of what's working, what's not working, and then you can start writing that playbook. You could start putting in sales sequences. You could start investing in a CRM. You could start managing and documenting, automating, making the unit of economics slightly better. But but first is doing and executing and figuring out what works, and then step 2 is obviously scaling and investing in process automation.
And for our listeners who have watched we did a 3-part series recorded yesterday, and by the time this comes out, we'll probably be out as well. So perhaps you've seen it. And it's around hiring your first salespeople. So we spent a lot of time yesterday talking about that, sort of the first 1 and 2 hires. And for those who have seen that, or maybe we'll leave here, and I highly recommend you do check it out, because it basically adds a little more context, and you'll also probably appreciate why Ed and I are friends, because he speaks almost exactly the way I speak to it. Yesterday, you've sort of there's a lot of confirmation bias going on here. It really sounded identical to the things that I had called out yesterday. From everything from hiring within industry and not conflating industry with with the book of business, and spoke deeply about that. So really good, man. That's very, again, supportive of sort of our beliefs, and I think for the both of us, I mean, we have a very interesting lens into the industry, because not only have we both come from brokerage and had I would say very good success in this space, we're both now building businesses that work with these customers, by the hundreds. So it's not just our own, as much as you can work at 4 or 5 companies, it's still in the scope of all the things going on, relatively limited. But I think we can say from our own experience, plus the other 300 to 500 brokers that we've sort of bumped into along the way, this is an accumulation of learnings that manifests this way. So it's I guess from my own perspective and in my own sense of ego, it's nice to hear you validate what I said, because I do really respect and value your opinion in the space, because certainly from the first time we met, I've really recognized what a good a good contributor you are to this space, and how it didn't take me long to really appreciate your skills and your your access to the market. So again, thanks for saying that, and I think it comes from someone who knows what they're talking about. Man, listen, I think for a last question, I'd like to just get some of your advice on
one more quick piece that I want to add into that, because I think coming back full circle with the value proposition of capacity and selling something meaningful. One of the things I don't see a lot of brokerages doing is setting their sales folks up to properly sell capacity. And that almost requires a middle layer. A lot of brokerages are set up carrier side, customer side, and there's some tension and tug of war sometime between rates and operations. But when we're really thinking about how to give the resources to the salespeople to succeed, because that's our jobs as leaders. It's one thing to go and hire those salespeople and find the right personas and the qualities and the characteristics of those folks that you want to hire. But if you're not giving them and providing the resources for them to succeed, then you're just shooting yourself in the foot and wasting everybody's time and probably burning bridges along the way. I think it's imperative to have some sort of analytics team or operations team or some sort of weekly meeting or somebody that sits in the middle of that carrier side, customer side, who can properly bridge that gap and sit there and arm those salespeople with the ammo to go out to those shippers and say, let's talk about your network, and be able to quickly say, we had X amount of trucks there last week. This is where our capacity goes. This is the flow of movement of our network. And let's make sure that we're reselling that. It's to go out and hire folks and talk about all of this, and selling capacity is meaningless unless you actually put the structure in place to support those folks.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And that speaks to almost a sort of an indirect plug to Rose Rocket and Neutral, really, to say that when we're out in the field and I'm out speaking with customers, I'm encouraging them to spend more on technology. This is never about, hey, let's cut your technology costs. You really have to. I think what you're saying in a sense is that you need the analytics is going to come from technology, not a team of people running macros on a spreadsheet. It has to be automated. It has to come to you. It has to be delivered to you automatically. And I would say that we need for you, in order to scale your business and grow your business, you need technology to do that. And you need to be looking at technology not as a cost center, but as your competitive advantage, which means you need to invest, and you need to invest more. It's a difficult conversation I have to have with a particular potential customer or an active customer who's looking to buy more. When they lead with, we want to reduce our IT spend. That's just not a strategy to win in today's market. You really need to be thinking about how can you spend more on technology. There are certain cost centers and certain things that you can as you said, how can we scale and reduce certain costs or keep certain resources at the same level. If you have another answer besides technology, I'd love to hear it, because I don't think there is one. I think it's the only really way to do that. And so, to your point, it's about putting people in the middle, but really powered by technology. That is. I don't want to be binary in the statement, but that is the only way to do it. I don't know that there's any other thing that you can do that's going to effectively allow you to scale your business and get meaningful information, sell meaningful value to your customers if you're not highly engaged and leveraging technology as a competitive advantage to your business versus viewing it as a line item on your P&L. Don't do that.
Yep, totally agree. The only nuance I could potentially argue is in integration technology, or is it just purely a pipeline that enables your technology? And you do an integration, it's fire and forget, and you never have to worry about it again. And I think that there's little things out there that aren't necessarily costly that open access. And I use the example of Plaid quite a bit. Plaid allowed most folks to use apps that they wanted to use to connect to their banking records. And while the technology, the piece of technology that the consumer is using is valuable, that's the investment, the consumer investment, whether it's the time to download that application or the cost to download that application. There's a lot of value derived from the back-end integration that may not necessarily be technology to the consumer using it, but adds tremendous amounts of value to all of the different applications. So I think we're absolutely saying the same thing. I just think that there's other things folks can do rather than necessarily going out and getting a SaaS subscription.
100%.
There's more to that technology piece that folks can evaluate.
Yeah, and I think that's a good call, and I appreciate the clarity. And I think when I think of invest more, it's meant in more of a macro statement, in that may be simply investing the time to discover this, or quite frankly, hiring folks that understand this enough to do it. Because at the end of the day, you may not make massive cash investments in a SaaS product, but if you want to be a technology-enabled organization, you're going to have people who understand technology in your organization. And traditionally, those are going to, and increasingly more so, cost you more to hire. So I think the costs to your business will be had somewhere along the line, but I think it will pale in comparison to the cost to your business of not doing these things. And so it's not a direct shot to say, spend more on software as a service line item. And I, again, appreciate that clarity. But it's hard to imagine where you're not making some type of meaningful investment in some maybe more indirect way to your business in order to achieve an opportunity for scale and automation and ultimately value to your customer, because all of these things are really all delivering better value to your customer. It's more accurate information. It's quicker time to load covering. It's a win-win, and it just takes the vision, the understanding, and the commit to make these types of I'll air quote it for the sake of this dialogue, investment into the business. I think we'll wrap it up there, my man. That was really great for our first podcast. I felt super comfortable. So thank you for being our first guest. It's a real softball for me to talk to you because I just love doing it so much. So that was great, man. Appreciate your time. And where can people find Ed and all things Neutral?
Editneutral.com, NEWTRUL, or neutral.com. But feel free to send me an email, sales@neutral.com, if you have any brokerage related or technical questions. Happy to field some inbound emails and or pass it off to folks who might be able to answer questions above my pay grade.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Ed Stockman, thank you very much.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you for joining us today on Freight Famous. And if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe.
Perfect.
Okay.
Plug that subscription.
Okay.
Great job.
Thank you. That felt good.